Are your ulcerative colitis symptoms proving difficult to manage? Tremfya guselkumab can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. At 1 year, many patients taking Tremfya achieved clinical remission, and some patients also achieved endoscopic remission. Individual results may vary. Tremfya is a prescription medicine used to treat adults with moderately to severely active ulcerative colitis. Serious allergic reactions and increased risk of infections may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and TB. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or if you need a vaccine. Ask your doctor if Tremfya can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. Call 1-800-526-7736 to learn more or visit tremfyaradio.com.
Work.
The sound of praise for your Sunday morning.
The only one who could ever teach me.
Introducing Reverend A.R. Bernard of the Christian Cultural Center.
Was the son of a preacher man.
And Rabbi Joseph Potasnik of Religion on the Line.
The only one who could ever teach me.
Now, here's the Rev and the Rabbi, where faith matters.
Good morning. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Rev, I was thinking, everybody's talking about tariffs and 25% higher, and I get it. One of the reasons I get it is because we Jews have lived with 25% higher. When you look at what we pay, kosher food and kosher for Passover, it's expensive. So we empathize with what everybody's going through, but we've suffered with that for some time. Rev?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. This is a holy season, so I hope we get to talk about our various faiths and the things that go on in this particular season.
So what does it mean for you? What is this season for you?
Well, we begin because Ramadan started March the 1st, I think, actually on a Friday or Saturday. Yeah. And it's a holy week for Muslims, and they're fasting and they're praying. For us, we begin actually on Lent, also known as Ash Wednesday. And too often, Lent and Ash Wednesday is only associated with the Catholics, but Protestants also celebrate Lent, and it's 40 days that lead up to the Passion Week and, of course, Easter Sunday. And it's a time where we, for 40 days, fast. We give up something. We live in a consciousness of the presence of God, the sacrifices that we make when we are persons of faith. We elevate our mind and heart towards God, and we bring our fleshly appetites under subjection, under control. So it's a wonderful time. Not all Protestants celebrate the whole 40 days that lead up to Passion Week. And of course, Passion Week is Good Friday, or Palm Sunday first, then Good Friday, and then it leads to Easter Sunday.
How
about you?
Well, as you're talking, Rev, I'm thinking in Hebrew of the word for love, chiba. And I'm looking at the word, and I'm saying it has the same root as chovah, which means responsibility. And I think what you've described is when you love your tradition, it's not just an oral statement. It comes with responsibility. When you love an individual, it comes with responsibility. So here you are in this holy period. You're saying we have to fast, we have to give something up because we're embracing it. We're committed to it. And it's just not all about talking about it. It's about doing it. It's about living it.
Yeah, it's a season of prayer, reflection, and renewal. And, we embrace the values of compassion and justice and unity. And I think that transcends all faiths. So whether it's salam, shalom, namaste, sasri akai, or shanti, or just peace. It's a time that in our various traditions, we draw closer to God, hopefully to one another, in understanding, respect, and love.
One of the most meaningful moments, I've been to your services at Christian Cultural Center. I've been to many services. When I was a student, I used to go to churches and synagogues and listen to preachers and try to observe styles. And one of the things that always moved me was when that moment comes when you extend your hand to the other and, peace unto you. Or in a synagogue when you extend your hand and say, shalom to that person. You're doing it with a person who is different than you are in many ways, and yet you're embracing the person saying, we belong to this greater, moral universe, to this greater place where God is above us and we are here with a responsibility to treat one another with respect.
It's in the context of the Sunday service for us that we experience community, a spiritual family, shared values centered on our faith, our Christian faith, and our beliefs. And that's important. So, in some Protestant contexts, we call it a time to pass the peace. In our congregation, we turn and exchange words of greeting and love to three people, specifically, and that's part of the service. In fact, that it precedes going into the message, the sermon, the homily, and it brings people together. We're going to now, after a time of worship and giving and prayers, we're going to sit and be instructed in the wisdom of the scriptures.
I was thinking about the Passover experience for us, and it says 30 days before Passover, you have to ask questions. You have to learn what Passover means. You can't just go to a Passover Seder without preparation. You can't run a marathon without preparation. If you want it to have meaning, if you want to be successful, there's work involved. And then Passover also means that you're giving up certain foods. Things become prohibited, but it's all done because you love your tradition, because you embrace it with this commitment. And I think sometimes when we talk that way, people look at us, commitment. What does that mean? It sounds like it's something very heavy. Oh my God, I'm getting to something that I can't get out of. But when you love something, you don't see it as being oppressive. You see it as being liberated because you're really part of something that brings you meaning. The Cardinal said some time ago that we don't end with Good Friday in Christian tradition, right? There's Easter Sunday. And, when the Passover, we sit together and we taste the bitter herbs, but then there's the meal and the singing and the embrace of one another, the community at that table. And I think one of the necessary ingredients of religion today is expressions of joy. It's not just about pain. It's about privilege. It's about, singing and laughing. And being religious is a wonderful experience.
Yeah, and two things I'd like to touch on. First thing is we reflect on the Saturday between Good Friday and Easter Sunday. Good Friday representing sacrifice, crisis, the state of humanity, of anger and violence against the innocent, suffering for the guilty. And those who trusted that Christ was indeed Messiah, to have him, now die. And then Saturday, it's Saturday between the Good Friday and Easter Sunday or Resurrection Sunday represents a time of turmoil and wonder, and where you're really pressed to believe, to have faith that things can change, that tomorrow will bring something better. So it really tests our hope in between for us, Good Friday and Easter Sunday or the resurrection. Second thing is spiritual versus religious. You and I talk about this all the time, all right? Because there are those who want to dissolve the institution of the church and all of these traditions and practices, and they want to be spiritual and not religious, is the terminology is being used, especially by this generation. But the reality is, how do we pass on our spirituality from one generation to another without practices, without tradition? So religion is the codification of spirituality into ritual and practice so that it can be taught and preserved from one generation to another.
I remember going to services when I was a young boy with my father and mother. I'd learned by example. I saw what they did, and I emulated them. I saw my father, survivor, my mom as well, two survivors of the Holocaust who still believed. I used to ask my father, how did you endure that horrific period? He said, I believed in tomorrow. I always felt tomorrow would be a better day. But I became imbued with that love of Judaism because my parents loved Judaism. And I think young people today need better examples. They need to see exemplars of this commitment, of this decency. Because what bothers me is that what we say on the inside very often, Rev, we don't see on the outside. There's a gap between what we're talking about and what's happening on the streets.
It is true, and in anything, Rabbi, we need a model, right?
Right.
When we come up with an idea and a concept, we then say, okay, let's create a model that expresses that concept before we can actually implement it. We want to test it and see if it works, and that comes through a model. So we need models of standards of morality and values lived out on a daily basis. I think that's very important point that you make.
Don't we say that young people want three things from parents? A hand to hold on to, a shoulder upon which to lean, but above all, an example from which to learn. And I think those three things are necessary. And young people, if they don't get it at home, where are they going to get it?
Well, you just hit the nail on the head, Rabbi. My concern is that here in America, the family, as we have known it, is in crisis. And I was about to say traditional family, but the word traditional, is relegated to right wing or conservative or Christian. But no, the family model transcends Christian faith, Christian religion, and has been found throughout history in societies around the world. The family is the first place of socialization. It's where we learn morals and values and standards and etiquette and manners and how to interact with people. So I have a great concern that we are turning away from what is foundational to a healthy society, and that is a strong family and strong family values.
Look at Genesis. What does it begin with? The creation of the world, the creation of the family. You can't have the world without the family. And for some reason, when you mention that to some, you're just archaic. You're just old-fashioned. Well, give me that old school. I'll take it over some of the new school things I see today.
Yeah, family is foundational to the success of a society. It serves as like I said, the primary institution for socialization, moral development, economic stability is experienced and learned in families. Emotional support, which we all need, all of that comes into play. And family is the place where it all happens. I cannot tell you the value of how much I experienced by having an intact family, even though I grew up without a father.
Yeah.
My uncle stepped in. I had father figures from the community. It was just so important that the village came together to shore up my deficiency in the family unit.
We're going to take a break right here, Rev. When we come back, we'll talk about the guest we're going to have, which I think is going to highlight such an important conversation with what is happening in our world today.
So stay tuned for more of the Rev and the Rabbi right here on Red Apple Audio Networks.
Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, where faith matters. The Rev and the Rabbi. Faith matters. The Rev and the Rabbi.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, during the break, you mentioned two issues that resonate with you and others and certainly warrant emphasis, discussion. Please talk about them.
Well, this month of March is several things, colorectal cancer month, but it's Women's History Month.
Hmm.
And for me personally, it's multiple sclerosis month. And, my wife suffers from multiple sclerosis. And, you know, those of you, our listeners, who are challenged by this or have a family member who's challenged by this, it can be quite challenging for the family as a whole because it doesn't affect the individual only. The whole family comes into play. So I'm using my social media platforms to talk about it. In fact, I even give a few tips for people who are dealing with things like this because especially when it's a husband and wife situation and the husband, like myself, becomes a caregiver,
Hmm.
I have to manage my time differently. I have to make sure that there's a support network that's there as I travel, as I do all these things. So, any type of
Yeah.
sickness in life, but especially something like this, can be quite challenging to the family.
It's interesting because what you're saying is if we have the situation or we have this challenge in our lives, one of the ways of addressing it is to talk about it with others. When I was growing up, if someone, for example, had cancer, you used to whisper cancer. You
Right.
wouldn't mention it, right, out loud.
Mhm.
It was a taboo subject. And I think one of the healthy things with social media is that there are sources available where you can turn to for strength, and people are not afraid to reveal, this is what I'm facing. This is what my loved one is facing. This is what is required of us. And you're bringing strength to others by doing that. That is a necessary development.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I highly recommend that if you have a loved one that is challenged by a debilitating disease or sickness, educate yourself about it. Learn as much as you can, especially to understand the symptoms and the progression of that particular disease, so that you can better support that person and understand what they're going through, and don't assume things.
Mhm.
You have to build open, I'm being pastoral here, Rabbi,
Mm.
but there has to be open and respectful communication between yourself and the individual who's challenged, encouraging them to talk about their feelings, their
I
struggles, their preferences, all of
I
those things
remember
come into
I
play.
remember my dad years ago, before social media, suffered with dementia.
Mm,
And I have to tell you, you turn, where do you turn? You look at some reference books, you try to find people who went through this, but you didn't have the outlets you have today. And any family that is experiencing, that kind of problem, you got to be able to deal with it effectively if you're going to make a difference. And the person who's dependent on you is dependent on your knowledge, right?
yeah.
So you're doing the right thing to help this person get through this difficult time. And of course, as a person of faith, you understand that this is something that this is a test of faith. How could God do this to me?
Well,
Here-
yeah. It's
Right.
a double struggle
Yeah,
because you're struggling with
right.
the disease and you're also struggling with your faith. And one of the things that I learned is as people are physically challenged by some sickness or disease and they lose their mobility and independence, you've got to be careful not to try to do everything for them because they want to still do as much
Right.
as they can for themselves. So you got to support and at the same time help them to be independent
I
in
remember
areas that they can
I
be.
remember saying to my mom years ago, "Don't worry, if anything happens, I'll be there. I'll take care of you." It was the worst thing I could have said. She said, "God
Mm.
forbid. I'm going to be dependent on a child to take care of me," because the
Yeah.
thought of losing that independence, that autonomy was frightening. So you have to be very sensitive that you're balancing. You want to help, but you want the person to be able to help himself or herself. We have an interesting guest today, someone that we've come to know and admire, Alan Abramson, who's a well-known, well-respected criminal defense attorney, and he's going to discuss a subject that's on everybody's mind right now. It's in all the papers. There is someone at Columbia, a graduate student, already graduated, I believe, and subject to deportation, has a green card, subject to deportation. There's going to be a hearing, and you get all these different opinions. Can you? Should you? And so we need to learn what is going on, and that is something that I find is decreasing in our society, learning the facts, getting all the details before you arrive at an opinion.
Yeah. We tend to have an opinion first and then try to get the facts later. Yeah. So it's going to be a great conversation. Yeah. Stay tuned for more of the Rev and the Rabbi show right here on Red Apple Audio Networks.
Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, the Rev and the Rabbi.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, we have with us our legal expert, Alan Abramson of the firm of Abramson Morak here in New York. And, of course, one of the subjects that people are talking about is what's happening at Columbia, the status of Mahmoud Khalil and his First Amendment rights, if he has any, in this case. Alan, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure. Good afternoon, Rabbi and Reverend. So nice to hear you.
Great to have you on the show.
All right. Give us some background on this, Alan.
Okay. Well, first, let me just say this. The one thing that, to me, is absolutely clear about this situation is that nothing is clear. And there's nothing that is black and white. There are people lined up saying it's an absolute violation of his First Amendment rights. There are other people saying he doesn't have any of those rights, and the administration is perfectly within their rights to do this. And everybody is certain. But I have to tell you, there are just so many shades of gray and nuances here that and questions that have to be answered before you can make any determinations as to what should happen. But my understanding is that Mr. Khalil is not a citizen of the United States. He is a green card holder. And that means that he doesn't have the same rights as a citizen of the United States in the sense that he can't vote, he can't hold certain offices, he can serve in various branches of the military and things like that, but it's not the full rights of a citizen. And what is happening here is that he was arrested without a warrant. He is in detention now and subject to deportation proceedings. And they're trying to expedite that deportation as quickly as possible. Now, what's clear is that if you're a green card holder, you can have your green card revoked under certain circumstances. For example, if you commit certain crimes, certainly crimes of moral turpitude, the government can also, revoke your green card. In this case, what the government is saying is that there is some sort of national security threat or threat to American foreign policy, and that is the basis of the government's attempt to deport Mr. Khalil. But that doesn't end the inquiry. You have to determine, well, what is the national security threat? What's the threat to foreign policy? For example, there have been groups that, and I think the president referred to this the other day, that there were groups that were distributing flyers and posters that I would say to many people were very incendiary. Well, a couple questions. What was Khalil's role in the distribution of those flyers? Did he actually distribute flyers, or is he just a member of the group? Does being a member of the group mean that, that's enough? Is membership of the group enough to, result in your deportation? And remember, at this point, he is not charged with any crime. Well, I know one of the things he certainly did was he was an advocate for the protesters, and may have been involved in some prohibited conduct, taking over buildings and things like that. But these are all fact-specific questions that nobody is asking, and certainly nobody is answering. So that's
Alex,
really where we are right now. Yes.
Yeah, so let me ask you, because you know Claudine Gay had to resign over issues from Harvard University. She's former president, but Harvard is now on a list of schools, including George Washington University, Johns Hopkins University, NYU, Northwestern. Uh, these are schools that are under threat of having millions of dollars in grants and contracts, like Columbia, canceled on them. Now, our institutions of higher learning are for debate, are for differences of opinion, are for dialogue, healthy, reasonable conversation, discussion. Is this dangerous? Is this leading us in a direction where freedom of speech is really not free anymore?
Well, I don't know if I would phrase it as freedom of speech isn't free anymore. But there are concerns that have to be raised. Protest is a traditional activity and an encouraged activity in many ways on college campuses for the exchange of ideas. But there's a difference between that and actions that people can take. I think many of the things you're referring to are, for example, you can't set up checkpoints on college campuses and question whether people are Zionists or Jews or Israelis and prohibit them from going to certain parts of the campus. You can't do that. That's not speech. That's conduct, and
right.
That may infringe upon or it may call for the university to take action against conduct that could be deemed to be anti-Semitic and violates U.S. laws and college requirements.
So, Alan, if they're distributing literature, and literature is Hamas literature, the points of Hamas, and it says, kill the Jews, we have to destroy the Jews, is that protected by First Amendment?
Well, let me start off with the easier example first. If they were raising money to supply arms to Hamas or any terrorist organization, that's not free speech. If they are thinking that there is a justification for the barbaric acts of October 7th and other atrocities, but it should be used to criticize Israel or to bring about change in foreign policy, that is getting closer to speech. Kill the Jews as a threat? No, that is hate speech. And even though you can think, you can have instances of speech that we all find to be abhorrent, as long as it's not calling for action. As long as it's not.
But it is, Alan. Kill the Jews is calling for action, isn't it?
Is that what it said? Is that exactly what it said? Kill the Jews?
Well, if you look at the charter, we have to remove Israel. We have to remove the Jews.
Oh, you're referring to the Hamas.
Hamas, yeah, which is in the literature. I'm giving you the example again. You said something before that is so important. We don't have all the facts. It's not black or white. We live at a time, unfortunately, and social media complicates it, where everything is decided without the delineation of all of the information. That's a dangerous thing to do. So I'm giving you a hypothetical. Distributing literature of Hamas, and Hamas literature says, kill the Jews. Is that prohibited?
Well, it's certainly something that Hamas can't be doing. It's certainly something that probably puts them, rightfully so, on the terrorism watch list.
Mm-hmm.
But the question is, if protesters are, talking, not making reference to that particular part of their charter, but they are talking about their perception of what is happening in the Middle East and why there either should be a two-state solution or a one-state solution and who has the rights to the land, then you're talking about, I think, issues of speech and not issues of conduct on behalf of the protesters.
Rev, you know what bothers me, Rev?
Rabbi, can I?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Alan.
Go ahead, Val.
This is very difficult for me because, look, I'm a firm believer in free speech, and I am absolutely appalled by some of the things that I hear being said and some of the actions that are being taken. And I don't want anyone to think that defending free speech is endorsing some of the messages of these folks. But in the United States, the Ku Klux Klan has the right to march. Can you find a more objectionable group? Can you find their message to be more abhorrent than anything in the world? But they have a right to march. They had a right to march in Skokie and in West Haven, Connecticut.
The Nazis, the neo-Nazis there, yeah.
The neo-Nazis, Nazis can march. And you know what? When they march, both the Klan and the Nazis, they march with police protection. The police escort them to keep them safe.
Yeah.
But because that's how far we go in this country.
But Rev, here's what bothers me also, and what very often doesn't enter into the argument. Why isn't free speech exercised by those who find what's being said abhorrent? One of the things that I find very troubling is you have these people who are protesting Israel, saying offensive things, but you don't have the counter-protest. You don't have those who are saying what you're saying is evil. And if you have a counter-protest, it's a much smaller number very often than the protesters. The administrators are not speaking out. And we feel there's a moral responsibility. The best way to counter ugly speech is with healthy speech. But we don't see enough of it.
That's the whole idea, is that the way you combat this message is by having people of good conscience, people of high moral, respond to this. Respond to the speech that you object to with your own speech and try to be as loud as you can. That's what we must do. You need speech. You need to counter hate speech with positive speech. You need to develop facts so that you can educate the public, but that's what is supposed to happen. You're supposed to create more speech rather than less speech. And that doesn't always happen. I mean, there have been a number of examples recently where, Jewish speakers have been invited to campuses and they've been excluded because people disagree with the message that they want to bring. And that's not the way free speech is supposed to work in this country.
And that's a tough thing because there's so many platforms, so many voices, echo chambers, etc., that are out there who are dominating, all of these spaces where conversations taking place, and it seems to be very biased, very one-sided, and that's what's dominating. So they're the loudest voices. They're the ones that are having the greatest degree of influence. And then our society is such, it seems like people are attracted to the extremes, to the shock jocks. How do we respond to that?
They are. And the problem is you look on the internet under any subject, especially one like this, and you see definitive accounts and definitive recitation of the facts that turn out to be all wrong. But the way we get our message across today on social media, it has the appearance of being legitimate and factual. And it is so beyond dangerous that we are living in a world like this, where there is so much misinformation out there, where facts are what you want them to be rather than what they actually are, that these are dangerous times because of that. These are very, very dangerous.
Alan, last time you were on the air with us, you spoke of examples with media that you had encountered where there was a misrepresentation of the facts, where things were completely wrong. And then when you try to correct it, it was ignored. It was rejected, your plea for, this is not the real story. Tell the story.
And Rabbi, I see this, and Reverend, I see this every single day. And the media, I had a conversation with a journalist the other day, and I said, I know you want to be accurate for the next day's news, but it's more important now that you be accurate for history so that people can understand what has happened during this time period. Newspapers and media outlets are so driven by having it first using clickbait to get people to come to their websites so they can increase, their profits. But they're not doing it to get it right. That is of a much lesser concern, and they're getting it wrong all the time. And again, I believe we're headed into a very, very dangerous time period. And getting back to this case, again, he may be someone that could be and should be deported. And that should happen after there is a thorough inquiry, after it's brought before a court, and there's a right to appeal, because even as a green card holder, he has certain rights. And I think we have to start asking the questions and getting the right answers before we make a decision as to, the bottom line in a case like this and other things that are in the news today.
And look, this is America. We have a dual economic system of capitalism, and I will venture to say socialism to a degree as well. I mean, we have social safety nets, so we have a dual economic system. But a lot of money is made when you take up a platform that's extreme, whether it's right or left. And these so-called pundits can become entertainers, and they make money. they push propaganda. That's very real.
And Reverend, it's not like they just make some money. They earn a living. I mean, they become extraordinarily wealthy by pushing out all their hate, their hate and misinformation.
Doesn't that say to us, faith leaders in all different walks of life, that we have a responsibility to be louder. We have a responsibility to counter this information. Because I often hear, and I often say to myself, where are all the leaders? Kids are being assaulted on campuses. They're being denied access to classroom. And you see a handful of politicians coming to the campuses and saying, this is offensive and they're going to be a punishment for this. But where's everybody else? Why is there this kind of silence, when it comes to this issue? I would dare to say, if there were literature being distributed about other groups, I think the counter-protest would be much louder. I think people would be up in arms. But somehow it's okay to do this when it comes to Jews. I
think. I'm sorry, Reverend. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, and that's part of the problem, Rabbi. We turn on the news, we see it, we express outrage, but it's not ringing our doorbell. It's not on our doorstep. Right. It's not on our neighborhood. It's not our family. So we feel distant from it. And it's not until it happens to us or someone close to us, all of a sudden, the reality hits us. Alan, you were going to say something.
I just would say, well, first of all, just to follow up on your point, we have to say something, but right now it's not us, but it could be us in the future. And, that's why we have to have, people of good conscience standing up and speaking out. But I just want to raise another issue. He's not like I have nothing to do with Mr. Khalil, and I want nothing to do with him. But if I was approached to represent him, would it be permissible for a law, or would I be subject to criticism if I took his case because I thought that there was a legal ground for him not to be deported? Not that he. And by the way, there's a difference between not being deported and not suffering other civil consequences. But would I be subject to scorn if I took up his case and represented him on a legal basis, on the legal basis for a deportation?
Well, hold that thought, because we got to take a break. When we come back, we'll be talking with Alan Abramson, legal scholar. Let me give you that, because your parents, when they were listening, always said it was the best program we ever heard when our son was on the air.
So stay tuned for more of the Rev and the Rabbi right here on Red Apple Audio Networks.
Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, the Rev and the Rabbi. Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, the Rev and the Rabbi.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
We're talking with Alan Abramson of the firm of Abramson Morak here in New York City.
So, of course, Rabbi, I've got the question.
Yeah.
What happens? What do you do, Alan, when you are in a situation where you can be open to criticism for taking a case?
Well, it's what I do. I mean, we need lawyers that will stand up for unpopular causes. Because, again, what's unpopular today for someone else you may be part of that unpopular cause in the future. And we need lawyers that, have the strength to stand up to the public scrutiny and public criticism. Having said that, I think, a lawyer has to, search their conscience to see if this is how they want to use their skills. There have been circumstances, by the way, where courts will appoint lawyers to represent people, like a Timothy McVeigh or somebody like that, who is hated for what he did, but he needs good representation. I think overall, if lawyers stand up and, focus on the right issues, focus on the legal requirements and put the government to their proof, I think that's an honorable thing to do.
What about the conscience factor? What about when your conscience says to you, I detest this person? How can I really represent him as I should?
Rabbi, it is such a difficult question. I have to tell you, yes, I would search my conscience to see if this is someone that I could represent in good faith, that I could bring all of my talents to bear on a case like this. And then you have to make an individual decision. But, again, lawyers have to stand up. I mean, look at what's happening now with these law firms that have lost security clearances, that have lost the ability to enter into any federal public building because of the clients that they represented a number of years ago. That's not healthy when lawyers are afraid to take cases, unpopular cases. That's what we need lawyers to do most of all, is to defend people that no one else is willing to defend. That's the oath that we take. But I do agree that you have to search your conscience to make sure that you can bring all of your talents to bear and that, you can provide the right type of client for your service. It doesn't mean you have to endorse their message in any way, shape, or form. You don't have to endorse the message. But if the government is if it has to be a crime of moral turpitude, or there has to be some support for a terrorist group, the government has to be able to prove that. And we're all better off if lawyers always put the government to their proof. You don't lie for a client, you don't distort, but you're doing the honorable thing by doing that.
Alan, I've known you for many years, and you've always had a voice that you were not afraid to use. You've been quoted several times in several media outlets, and I think very often the media turns to you for your opinion because they know he's going to speak his mind. He's going to speak from his heart and head. So thank you so much, Alan, for being with us. It was a very enlightening conversation.
Rabbi, thank you, and the Reverend for giving me this opportunity. I really treasure them. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alan. So thank you, our listeners, for joining us here every Sunday morning with the Rev and the Rabbi right here on Red Apple Audio Networks.
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to say, ahoy, or land ho, and not feel weird about it. So here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance offers access to the largest towing fleet on the water. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to say, shiver me timbers, and not feel weird about that either. Get more with Geico.